Hello, guys. Welcome to this new edition of Mind Podcast. This is Aadit Kapadia coming to you on yet another week. And I have a fabulous panel with me today to discuss the issues this week. I know we had promised that we would have, after our political discussion, we would continue doing political discussions, which we will. But unfortunately, this week, with the events of what have happened in Ukraine, Russia, geopolitics takes a little preference, a little higher preference over politics. Although my panelists today would be just as comfortable talking about politics as they would about geopolitics. So, without further ado, let me introduce our panelists today. My first panelist is, both are returning Mind Podcast champions, but Kishor Narayan he's a writer, he's a columnist, he's a podcaster himself. He's written for MyIndMakers, writes for various portals, various newspapers like Kannada Prabha, has his own podcast, India Rising podcast with Mohal. Our fourth panelist that was planning to be Mohal is unfortunately traveling. Otherwise, he would have been on this too. So, welcome to Mind Podcast, Kishore. Great to have you. And
Thank you, Adit. Pleasure is
and along
mine.
with Kishore is our own resident foreign policy geopolitical expert, but more importantly, our mind makers. Harita, now I want to introduce you as the person who basically looks after or is the number one villain for all the columnists when she gets back to them with their editorial comments. Harita, she's our sub editor at Mind Makers, takes care of various pieces and writes some phenomenal foreign policy articles as well. So, Harita, welcome. And thank you, both of you, for being up so early in the India time and being up bright and early for Mind Podcast.
Thank you, Adit, for your kind introduction. And then it's always a pleasure to be part of Mind Podcast.
Absolutely. So without delaying the inevitable, let's talk about it. I mean, crazy scenes, guys. Before we show the maps to everyone, and for our audio listeners on SoundCloud, this is primarily, going to be a conversational podcast. But for in between, just to sort of talk about areas and regions correctly, we might just do some show some maps on the screen. So for those, unfortunately, you might have to go to our YouTube stream. Uh, so just giving everyone a heads up. What do you think, Kishore? No one expected this. When I say that, American intelligence reports did say that there is chances of this happening, and for once, like everyone was like, "Oh, surely this can't happen. Surely that can't happen. Surely he's not going to actually, Russia is actually not going to go into Ukraine." So that surely seem to be the big statement last week, and that surely has turned into oh dear, like literally as the days progress. So if to summarize everyone, like the Russian forces have entered parts of Ukraine. Now media organizations, Washington Post, NPR, and others are coming up with maps. They have correspondents on the ground. CNN has some few correspondents there as well, and other organizations, and they are telling maps, but they're not clear because you don't know the extent, right? There was a whole situation where or I, I don't want to say Russia, but there were claims that a certain airport or airbase was taken over, and then there were counter claims by Ukraine that Ukraine government took it over, and then there are claims again. So there is a lot of that sort of situation is going on. There is obviously going to be a fight back from Ukraine as well, and it is going to be essentially a war unless and until there is a diplomatic solution taken place. But having said that, what do you think, Kishore? What do you make of everything that has just happened in the last few hours?
Uh, I think the world did not expect this to be a wow moment. The last wow moment in terms of a battle, in terms of a war, was the Gulf War, the first Gulf War, in terms of the TV broadcast of the visuals and things like that. After that, there have been conflicts and battles around the world, but they didn't have the same kind of an effect on the audiences around the world.
Hmm.
And surely people would have conveniently forgotten how a battle or a war looks like,
Hmm.
especially in urban areas, especially in densely populated urban areas. And I think you can't blame the people as well for thinking surely it's not going to happen. And that is where Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, kind of outthought everybody else and went on with his strategy and his plan of whatever he wanted to achieve. And I think that way people did not expect this coming, at least in this manner. All they would have thought probably would be a minor incursion into the eastern flank of Ukraine, probably into Luhansk and Donetsk, and probably securing Crimea in a better manner than how it is now. But an out and out assault onto the very heart of Ukraine, into Kiev, into other major cities, I think that was unexpected pretty much by everybody, every intelligence agency in the world.
Yeah. So excellent point, Kishore. And let's get into this. And Harita, now I'm coming to you, just to kind of show our viewers, this is sort of what it is. This is, again, this is a Washington Post map, and I don't know. I mean, it's like Kishore and I were talking about. There are other resources also that I'm sure are, updating the maps, but this is the first we could find. So this is where all the past approximate locations of the strikes are in the past 24 hours, and this is where it was earlier. I'll just zoom in a little bit so that it's a little easier for our viewers to see. But Haritha, what is your take? Right? I mean, this is unbelievable. We did not think that this could something so insane could happen. And uh, having said that, do you think the is it inevitable that the takeover of Kyiv will happen, or will it be that there won't be really a takeover or something? There will be just a different establishment there, and then the forces would retreat. What is your take?
See, there are at least two ways of looking at it. The first is the kind of past invasion, which, so to speak, the Western world would like us to say is like Russia's invasion of Georgia in 2008. It's like maybe it can be one kind of a scenario which we can anticipate. The second would be like what I really think is like Russia basically it aims to penetrate the Ukrainian administration. So that will be the kind of a stuff which they will be looking at, in the sense like something which would look legitimate, so to say, but then they would have a final say about all the policies, like the, especially when it comes to foreign policies and stuff like that. So in this aspect, I think like the sooner they will take over the Ukrainian capital, they would want to have their own people in place, especially in decision making and administration, so that like they can have a larger say in Ukrainian future. So by this is only one way of looking at it, but Putin is like quite unpredictable. We can't say anything much about him, but as things stand now, I think that is the way that's going to work, because like economic sanctions which US has failed, US wanted to. I mean, that was a big stick which US wanted to use against Russia
Hmm.
and to deter it. So I think like these are the two scenarios which I can possibly look at it. Russia, one is the Georgia kind of a scenario, and another is like placing pro-Russians in Ukrainian high offices. So beyond that, I don't think Russia has any. It doesn't want to really take over Ukraine in by any chance, because it's going to be a blunder, especially when it comes to geopolitics, and with the kind of flux around us, in the sense the world itself going through a flux, we can't anticipate that.
Yeah, no, the flux is the right word. I mean, our thoughts and prayers go out to the people of Ukraine who are suffering. I mean, because it can't be easy living through this. A lot of students, Indian students, are stuck there as well, and there are efforts being made for them to be brought back to India. But of course, that doesn't resolve the question. A lot of them actually went to do their medicals and stuff. So, what if they are in the last year? What if they're in their year three? I mean, how is that going to work? We really don't know. There's no telling, right? So, but having said that, what I wanted to just sort of talk about it for a second here, it was going to be this second map that we just tried to show on basically about Ukraine. And So let's look here. So basically, this is what happened, right? There are movements from Belarus as well into Kiev, north of Kiev, and that is where it gets very dangerous. There's Chernobyl, of course, is very close, the site of the, the disaster. And I think the Ukrainian National Guard, if I read correctly, was, protecting Chernobyl and stuff. Like, what they have to. There is a serious fear that if something hits there, or radioactive waste is released in the environment, no one knows what might happen and how dangerous that could be. But that is, like, I would urge people to read about it before coming to any conclusions. This is what I read in the few pieces. Then there are these two provinces right here. Crimea, of course, was in 2014, Ukraine lost, and there was this helicopter movement in the Kharkiv area, and Kiev is the capital where basically the forces are attempting, a sort of a takeover, if we were to believe reports. But these two provinces, Luhansk and Donetsk, and I'm sorry if I'm butchering the pronunciation, but these are like claimed areas which are by pro-Russia sort of, separatists. So it's a very complicated situation, and one has to talk about, like, how the world is looking at it, right? So, and the sad irony of this is, all of this was happening when the United Nations was in session, the Security Council. I mean, there was this bizarre moment we had, and that session was being chaired by Russia. So there is a bizarre moment that we had where the Ukrainian representative was showing his phone that as of 48 minutes ago, troops have entered into Ukraine. So would you like to comment on that? And, questions. And I mean, I what does one say about United Nations? Like, if that it was being made such a mockery of that, there was deliberations happening, discussions happening. The Out of the two entities in question, one of was the chair and the other was accusing, saying, "Look, I have latest information on my phone, and the prepared remarks I came with make no sense now whatsoever." So, what do you think, Kishore? How do you view at this?
It's quite obvious that the United Nations has become a joke in the past, say, 1, 2 decades. The Crimean annexation by Russia also was one such example where the world power did nothing to stop it. I mean, the violation of the sovereign boundaries of any sovereign state raises alarming questions. And unless and until you find a permanent answer to it, there is no way you can stop such things from happening again and again. I mean, if India could be chastised for entering into East Pakistan on the pretext of creating Bangladesh, although we were on the right side of morality, on the right side of history, we were still chastised by the United Nations back then. But then that was the precedent that was set back then in 1971 December. So it's quite obvious that there have been different yardsticks being used for the high and mighty and for the global south. I think that's the kind of dichotomy that United Nations has failed
Hmm.
comprehensively in addressing. And every time there is an incursion or an annexation or even an invasion happening in parts like, say, Libya, Syria, Yemen. There is wholehearted support for it, but same thing happening in Yugoslavia, same thing happening in Ukraine. That is when there is absolutely no harmony in the way United Nations thinks.
Yeah, and it's also how the Euro countries have also reacted. I mean, I've read reports on Twitter, and we were talking about it offline, that about the whole Germany and the energy situation with Russia. Is there sort of going to be the similar sort of agreement? There were reports about some demands made in the sanctions to not include the most expensive products, by the Italian authorities. Again, I'm quoting the quotes and pieces that I read on Twitter, putting out that as a caveat. I hope we get more clarification on that. But if that is true, that is shocking. I mean, how are certain companies, exempted, or certain fields? If you want to do that, do you have any moral authority to say that we have taken a principled stand? Because you clearly haven't. Right? Any stand that is based on economics, I mean, say it, right? I have nothing against countries saying that, boss, I want to take a principled stance, but my economic interests dictate doing this. The problem, what is happening is, There are some countries in Europe that don't want to take that stance, but then want to lecture other countries that we are not taking principal stance, but you should forget all relationships you have and should take the principal stance. So it's a very complicated situation right now, and and unfortunately, the part is the people of Ukraine are the ones suffering, right? And that is where the whole tragedy is, because they are clearly short-staffed. I mean, they need help. They need if they are to fight back and stuff. So, how does one look at this?
See, this kind of a hypocrisy is quite in our face, like when it comes to the entire Western media pulling up India for not taking a firm stand, right? When the NATO itself is not really sure of what they want to do with Ukraine. See, that's one point of it, and then another aspect is see, I mean, whatever be the thing, like India being the non-permanent member of UNSC at this point of time, the stakes are really high for India, and then this kind of a hypocrisy is going to hit very hard, in the sense like a or an in, when it forces India to do a tightrope walk, which they have to really understand that. When they themselves really have that kind of a sharp demarcation of what is right for them, in the sense the national interest and values, it shouldn't expect countries like India to take really a strong position, given that India has got a long-standing relationship with Russia. It is really inevitable that India would still want to have all its cards in place and not want to fritter them away, saying that okay, we strongly condemn that. And also, there is no point that India would issue any kind of condemnation, since as Brahmacharya Chalani has been rightly saying that, it's like none of the European countries or America, for this matter, never took a strong stand. Despite the China deploying about 2 lakh troops across the LAC,
Yeah.
and now not at least even asking China to pull back the troops.
Mm.
So, and I mean, we ourselves are going through all this kind of a thing, and Indo-Pacific is the region which is really facing the brunt of Chinese hegemony, and still Russia, America, for its which is really fixated on it, Russia is steering away from all these causes, and then
No, no,
trying to protect the Ukraine issue. Sorry, I'm digressing a little bit, but then here, what I want to really say is it's time that European countries and the West really understand what they really want to convey the message to the world, like whether they are with the values or whether they want to stick to their interests. The only interest which stays in mind is US still wants to be the superpower, and then it really wants to consolidate that kind of a space for itself.
no, I think there is another dichotomy, and I'm coming to you next, Kishore. Right? So I actually think there is no, in a strange way, hypocrisy in the American stance, because America has always said that they are going to look out for their interests. So they will act a certain way with China, they will act a certain way with Russia. So I actually see, now one can have a position agreeing or disagreeing with the position of that US takes, but there is no sort of hypocrisy that we are taking a moral high ground here or moral. There have been several sort of issues with that. Um, but having said that, the problems with India is actually, I don't see a lot of people in the American establishment having issues with India. There are a few Indian think tankers in Washington DC who are going into super meltdown mode, that why is India not doing this. Now they don't have. They're sitting in DC. Okay, some of them are sitting in DC and so they don't have the spine to raise even one question about America or the American policy, right? And I have not only asked, I mean, but I've known of people to ask, and then you see some public responses somewhere that, oh, we only talk about our brief is South Asia, India, and things. We don't talk about US policy or something. That's just a cop out. basically to not take a position, right? And that is the saddest part. Like, if you are a true analyst, right, then you should say that, okay, America did this for the self interest, India did this for the self interest. We actually don't agree with that positions, and that's what I'm saying. So India has a lot invested with the whole Russia, in the defense sector and so forth. And one can have a position saying that India should have come out strongly in favor of Ukraine and stuff. That's a legitimate position to have. But when you say that, oh, अमेरिका ने तो अपना सेल्फ इंटरेस्ट देख लिया, अभी इंडिया को तो सेल्फ इंटरेस्ट नहीं, एक मोरालिटी के ऊपर कुछ बोलना चाहिए, राइट? सो डू यू सी दैट डिफरेंस, किशोर, इन द एटीट्यूड?
Well, absolutely. I think uh, it's quite obvious that they would lecture us to vote. I mean, they want to think for us. They want to say how we should vote, and still give us no guarantees when it comes to China. They don't want to use their high officers to talk to China, to convince China in any which way. And all we would get probably say, okay, we would put Pakistan into an FATF blacklist. I think that's the kind of carrot that they are dangling to us, and they want us to bite the bullet, so to speak. Which I think in the current scenario, in the current context, the Indian administration, the Indian state is definitely not going to budge from its
No, I
stated
think
position.
this is a travesty seeped in the old Indian foreign policy of 30 years ago, where everything revolved around Pakistan, and also in the Western Hemisphere. I mean, I shouldn't say Western Hemisphere. In the Western side of the things, it was basically India and Pakistan were almost hyphenated, right? Now that dehyphenation has taken place since India has done well economically and so forth. So I don't think India will be just happy by saying कि हमने पाकिस्तान को ये किया हो गया, and especially when the Pakistani Prime Minister is in Moscow. I mean, who who advises Imran Khan? What a day to land up in Moscow and to come and say, I've come at a very
I
interesting time or something. Is
I'm
that
excited. I'm
I'm
excited. What an
excited.
exciting day! Yeah.
exciting day? Oh my goodness! I mean, talk about foot in your mouth and then trying to, like, and tumbling at the same time while that is. I mean, what do you think, Harita? What do you make of that statement? A, and do you think that now that the dehyphenation of India Pakistan has happened, India does not want to be governed by what Pakistan thinks and so forth?
Yeah, India has really come of the age, so to say, that nobody would dare to put India and Pakistan together anymore now. Because, like, given the kind of contrasting, I mean, especially in the aftermath of Afghanistan, given the kind of contrasting stances which India and Pakistan has taken, and also the kind of continuous humanitarian help which we have been extending to Afghanistan, nobody would ever even say that India and Pakistan can even hyphenate India and Pakistan. And further, like any terror activity in any corner of the world is somehow related to Pakistan. So that's a place like where Pakistan stand in the world geopolitics. So that is one part. And another thing, sorry to say that, but I am dim really stands true for what people say about Imran Khan, because that see the way he conducts himself, the way he behaves, like and then like the way Pakistan still thinks that it can keep America enchanted or in an illusion, still extracting what it wants from US and then getting the kind of a stuff from China, in terms of like having that kind of a China Park nexus of encircling India. This kind of stuff, I think it has when crossed its expiration date, and then like it is time that like they need to realize that it's not going to work anymore. You go around with a begging bowl and then still expect that people treat you with kind of respect and then like give you what you want. I mean, just because you are strategically placed, you are overusing that kind of thing in geopolitics. So I think the sooner the Pakistan realizes, the better it is, and also for the people or the countries across to say that it's not. I mean, we are doing deliberately some. we are deliberately doing something wrong by equating India and China. I mean, we are putting India and China together. So
No,
that
so I think, and we can come back to the whole vote situation as well, because I think there's a UNSC vote that happened, and I think India and UAE abstained, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know how China voted.
China,
China
China
abstained.
is
China
China
abstained.
is instead.
Yeah, so now coming and that happened actually just a few minutes or an hour before we recorded the podcast, so please pardon us if we don't have all the statements that they made. Again, like we said, this is a developing situation, so by the time this podcast is edited and uploaded, pata nahi kya ho gaya hoga duniya mein. Like, I almost feel like everything should be a live broadcast these days, right? So coming back to this whole discussion. Uh, I think Pakistan has another problem also. This clearly, this meeting with Russia was, I think there, we can be rest assured there was a bit of a Chinese hand in this, that they might have pushed this to happen. Um, the whole American scare, the what American analysts and watchers are scared about is what if Russia and China come closer, right? Because that is a sort of a nightmare situation for US. Now, having said that, there has to be some sort of solution seeped in practicalities. American manufacturing is not going to go away outside of China, instantly, because people are used to certain. The inflation is going to go through the roof and everything. Second is the whole oil debate, right? Oil and energy debate. How is Europe going to do that? And the third thing, which we haven't really talked a little bit about, is the whole role of Belarus, right? Like, there were there were pictures of tanks coming in from that border, and the Ukraine Belarus border is not the same as the Ukraine Russia border in terms of how it is patrolled or how it used to be. I'm talking about bahut pehle. Now we are hearing of joint military exercises that happened between Russia and Belarus. So, is are there going to be certain states across Asia that Russia is going to have friendly relationships, with friendlier relationships than what they had before? How does this play in the long scheme of things? What do you think, Kishore? I mean, I asked a lot of questions, but maybe summarize that.
No, I think Eastern Europe continues to be a fascinating region. Belarus, again, Lukashenko, Alexander Lukashenko, continues to be the biggest despot in that region. Now, we all know what he did, say, 4 months ago, when he got his own. Uh, he got a plane hijacked midair while it was flying on the Belarusian airspace. Why was that? Simply because there was an opposition leader who was in that plane, and the plane was not even landing in Belarus. It was mid-air. It was flying from some country to some other country, and this person, this country had the tenacity to go and order a forced landing in Minsk, and kind of arrest that opposition leader. So I think that's the kind of despot that we are talking about. Lukashenko cannot exist without Putin, and even for Putin, Belarus can eventually join a Russian Federation, so to speak, which might be a say Soviet light 2.0 version. I think that's the kind of you scratch my back, I scratch your back kind of an arrangement between Lukashenko and Putin. Now, with that, it was quite obvious, obviously for the Ukrainians, to know that Lukashenko would obviously side with Putin. Now, in what form would Lukashenko himself send Belarusian forces was an unknown. Probably Ukrainians would have had better intelligence. But I think it was quite obvious that, worst case, he would allow Russian forces to enter through the Belarusian Ukrainian border. I think that was pretty much a known rather than an unknown. Uh, Having said that, I think what struck me was the glaring amount of global diplomacy happening in the past 10-15 days. You had Emmanuel Macron, who himself is struggling to get re-elected. There is a French presidential election happening in, say, April, end of April. Now, amidst all that, he travels to Moscow. He tries to sit and reason with Putin across the long table. The photos are legendary. And he tries to get some kind of a concession from Putin, telling, okay, maybe I can talk with Biden. But by the time Macron comes back to Europe and tries to talk with Biden, Putin has already changed his mind and has already invaded Ukraine. This goes to show the amount of respect that the president of the Fifth Republic of France commands, even in Europe, forget around the world. Having said that, it's not that Putin himself was respected. He traveled to Beijing during the launch of the Winter Olympics. He got a one-on-one meeting with Xi Jinping and got all kind of assurances from Beijing, telling, "Okay, we are with you. We understand the dichotomy. We understand the Western hypocrisy." But then eventually, come to the actual voting in the Security Council, China abstained rather than voting against Ukraine, voting against the resolution, which implied that China, like India, took a neutral position. So much for the Russian diplomacy, so much for European diplomacy. So I think that way everybody is on shaky ground right now,
Yeah,
and
and
that kind of underlines the fact that too many things are happening too quickly.
yeah, no, and those saying that India also has to make up my mind. I don't think anyone has made up their mind, right? I think hopefully I think Mr. S. Jaishankar said a few words, and uh, I think Prime Minister Modi and Mr. Putin, President Putin have also spoken. And T.S. Tirumurthy, our UN ambassador, like our Indian ambassador to UN, he said why they abstained and stuff. Now, like I said, one could agree or disagree with the reasons that they gave. The issue here is everyone sort of is biding their time, thinking कि क्या होगा, right? And then there is a whole discussion and debate right now on dealing with Russia on other currencies which are not the dollar, right? So would that lead to a changing foreign exchange currency market? We don't know. Everything is right now up in the air. And the world is going to get hit by like higher gas prices as well. So inflation, which was already skyrocketing, will go even further because transportation costs are going to go through the roof. So, Anita, having said all this, uh, what do you make? What do you make? What do you think the next steps would be? Right? Would it be that the Russia would, after the new leader installed, Russia would pull back, or do you think they're for good for a long term?
I think they are not on there for a long haul. They are going to eventually pull back. And also, the thing is like economic sanctions have proved to be really ineffective in the sense like Russia has figured out how it has to go through all these things. And another thing is like there are like conflicting reports. I really cannot vouch for it, but then there were people who were saying like Russia can now use the cyber currency to get the for the trade, and alternatively it can use renminbi with China for its trade. And also there is a talk going around and then report saying that even with the calls shrill calls going around saying that Russia should be blocked from using SWIFT system. It's learned that Russia has also developed an alternate SWIFT system for itself in the last few years, and it has even sought cooperation from China to have its own kind of a system, which is called as a system for transfer of financial message. So, looking at all these things, I think financial sanctions are going to have its own kind of a deterrence effect, but we cannot really say that it's going to really cripple the Russian economy.
Mm,
That's one fact. Because, like, see, and, you need to definitely accept the fact that, like, European Union is reliant on energy security on Russia, and then like it's dependent on NATO for defense or its own security purpose.
mm,
So
mm,
it's like it has double predicaments. So taking this into consideration, it's like unlikely that it is going to take any kind of a strident position, so to say, or harden its stance against Russia. There is going to be some leeway, but instead of, I think world has seen enough of this like sanctions regime and its effect. They have to now come out or figure out some kind of a deterrent system wherein like you don't see these kind of invasions or attacks directly on smaller countries.
You know, I
So
I saw a clip or something where it was said that Swift code is certainly an option, but we can put it if you want to. So basically, saying कि हाँ हमें पता है ये sanction हो सकता है, पर वो भी नहीं करेंगे रशिया के ऊपर, right? So that is sort of the see. हाँ, you're saying Harita something?
yeah, that's the thing I was trying to say. That in the sense, like, I mean, sanctions are not going to work any longer. So they need, I mean, how much ever we would say that, like, just dismiss it as what people say, like, sit across and then constructive diplomacy is the only alternate solution. So right now, I think that is the only solution which we can really think of, because otherwise I don't otherwise see any other solution other than this to break this kind of a thing, log jam, so to say, as what, because diplomacy in terms of like European diplomacy, as rightly highlighted by Kishore, or like the kind of a stance adopted by China, or they have really failed. So it's like going, now countries have to have straight talk, like, see, this is what we are going to give you, what you are going to do in return. So that's the kind of a straight talk that nations
There
must
is a human cost to
give.
this, right? I mean, people are forgetting Ukrainians are stranded in lines. There are Ukrainians who have not served, but to fight their country, they're taking up arms, to fight them, and they're severely outnumbered, both not only in terms of people, like in terms of the strength of the forces, also in terms of the weapons used. I mean, we are hearing stories of bombings and so forth. So it's all well and good for countries to say what they say, or Italy to ask for, luxury brands excluded and so forth. I mean, there are caveats, but ultimately there is a human cost to these caveats also, right? So, and I find this like people in America are outraging about it, right? They are rightfully so, but they're not understanding the full picture of what is at stake and why Europe is acting the way they did. Yesterday, I saw there was a show called The View where there is a Joy Beher करके एक speaker here, columnist. I mean, she's one of the panelists, and she said something about, after that, someone had just said about how tragic Ukraine is. It's like, yeah, I had my trip to Western Europe, Italy also. I've been planning it for 4 years, and I don't know how it's going to. I mean, I'm like, how heartless and thoughtless can you be? Like, so this sums up the सब अपना अपना छोटा छोटा देख रहे हैं, and they're judging the other person for being selfish while they themselves are being selfish in their outlook, right? Either condemn one or condemn all. Like, I mean, I didn't mean condemn one. I'm saying don't condemn anyone or condemn all. Like that is the situation. Um, but moving from there, let's look at the picture forward, right? And Kishore, I wanted to just as we get into the home stretch of the podcast, the last 10 minutes, why don't you start with talking about what you saw the European Security Council today, or what is your take on that, and a path forward, and then Harita, feel free to come in as soon as Kishore is done.
Okay, 2014, Crimea annexation by Russia. Again, Security Council resolution. Again, Russia vetoed in its own favor. India abstained. Uh, 2022, pretty much a repeat of what we have seen. So it was quite obvious that India would take a nuanced neutral position. Russia would obviously veto in favor of itself, which would imply that the resolution would not even be worth the paper that it is written on. So I think that way, uh, any initiative taken by the United Nations would mean nothing. I mean, they can't censure China for having let the pandemic let loose around the world. They can't lecture China. Uh, they can't teach the proper lessons to China, and still they come and want to impose their morality on the global south, so to speak. So I think it's become a joke. It's become a non-entity already, and probably going forward, I think there might be smaller countries, say the middle powers like Iran, Turkey, uh, Saudi Arabia, India, and probably even say Taiwan, who would not toe the United Nations line, who would want to deviate in their own self-interest. I don't rule out a quick Israel Iran conflict. I don't rule out a quick Saudi Iran conflict, or even a Turkey Saudi conflict, wherein they would think, um, anyway, nobody is listening to the United Nations. Why should we listen? Why don't we make hay while the sun shines? I think that's the kind of deviations that I think might happen in the
Yeah.
medium term.
The sad part of it, and which is sort of in a macabre here, is also that the world war might be the world at war with other, with their own individual war, and not fighting each other. That, if I were to summarize Kishor's statements, and that's true with Israel also. We are seeing a very new Israel, UAE, Saudi, India, like, that is a group that is forming, right? Like, on,
The Western thought, so to
yeah.
say.
So it's also, first it used to be said that you go from Israel to India and we don't know how many allies they were, but certainly Kuwait, Bahrain, Saudi, there is, I'm not saying they are allies, but on many diplomatic levels and on certain fronts you are seeing certain things happening. So I don't know how that will change. But like you said, that what has happened is because United Nations has become very selective in what it chooses to highlight and what it doesn't. That issue is being capitalized. So that is why Putin could get away. I mean, I wouldn't say get away, but he made a crazy statement. And short of vocal condemnations and some chota mota sanctions, kuch hua nahi hai, right? So I thought I read a piece where the entire Russian cabinet, or at least those close to him, were personally sanctioned and things like that. But that's not going to change anything, right? If he comes to the table, for the diplomatic table, those personal sanctions are going to be taken off within minutes. That'll probably be the first thing that's taken off. So, Harita, what do you think? Like, after all this, who can broker the diplomatic things, right? You had a very passionate play from the Ukraine envoy also wanting India to take a certain stance, and then India did what it did. So, what do you think? Who
Mhm.
break the
See,
grid?
I think time has come that we should break this kind of a sense of entitlement of veto wielders. Okay, they have stalled the functioning of UNSC completely. Okay, so that is one aspect, and another thing which we need to realize is countries are fed up with this kind of superpowers. They no longer want to have superpowers, and another strategy which they want to, which they are eagerly looking forward, is kind of a multi alignment or issue based collaborations or issue based coalitions. And also they're looking at stuff like where they no longer want to be in this block or that block. They just want to win. And also it becomes win. See, there is this kind of an irony in the sense when people talk of globalization, say, so to speak, that there should be a free movement and then interconnectivity with this or with all between all the countries. There, here comes the time when we should seriously think that do we have to, do we still be, should we still believe in terms like a superpower or things like that. It's time that we dump all these kind of a hypocrisies and tags along with the nations. And when we the first thing, at least, to make UN relevant is to completely think of overhauling the system and then reviving the whole system, so that it becomes some kind of a functional body. Otherwise it has been reduced into a puppet. So
No,
that's one.
look at the five veto powers also. It's crazy. It's America, it's two European countries, Russia, which is half, Asia, Europe, and then you have China, right? Now, not, I mean, leave apart that India is not represented, a sixth of the world's population essentially. Uh, Australia, Asia, Australia, New Zealand, that area, is not represented. You don't have the Pacific side of it. You don't have South, and no representation from South America or Africa, right? And these same folks sit in decision. So I mean, no, this whole veto thing is archaic, right? It's completely. I have been like saying that India should be one of the five, one of should be included in the big group of five, should be a group of six, including India. But now I don't mind in saying that veto ही abolish कर दो. Why do you even have a veto? And I think India should lead, be at the forefront of this effort, right? And then I think it would be, we would have this eerie funny scene where 200 countries are trying to get rid of the, or 150 countries are trying to get rid of the veto, and the five superpowers are showing a veto against getting rid of the veto. I mean, we might find that sort of thing. And who knows? I honestly think India should be at the forefront of doing this, because और अगर नहीं करना तो भी ठीक है, because United Nations as an entity is suffering from severe loss of credibility, where no one takes it seriously, unfortunately, beyond a certain point. And it was a great concept when it took place, right after World War II, League of Nations and then United Nations. I just hope that it gets some of the power back, but for that they need to develop some teeth and basically talk.
Yeah, it should be reflective of the geopolitical churn of the day.
Right.
See, just as every organization reinvents itself, it's time that UN should reinvent itself.
Yeah.
75 years is a big time scale when it comes
And
to.
even if you can't get rid of the veto totally, at least don't have the insane thing of, with the countries which are being debated, for which them having the veto to veto a resolution against them or something like that. This is just silly. But that's how the things stand. Before we wrap up, guys, any recommendations that you, Kishore, and Harita, you both have, and then we'll wrap up the podcast. I know we've got a little bit over time, but I hope everyone had a great time listening. I mean, stay tuned for the recommendations. We're still not done yet. So who wants to go first? Kishore, Harita, which one of you?
Uh,
I really want people to read about Gotham Sen's article in First Post, which rightly reflects how the West has been trying to impose its kind of fixation towards Russia,
Hmm.
and then has brought us to this kind of scenario.
Fascinating. Kishore?
I would recommend an old book, Great Game.
Hmm.
That kind of, I mean, it comes back into relevance every now and then. And every time we have an Afghanistan happening, every time we have a Ukraine happening, we kind of understand why smaller nations, so to speak, feel the pinch, feel the brunt of everything that happens when two large powers are fighting it out. And I think that kind of yes, exactly what is happening even now. Pity that Ukrainians are fighting it out all alone. They were led into that rosy path of a NATO membership for almost 2 decades now. Nothing materialized. And now, when Putin loses his cool and invades, now again you have NATO sending a few hundred, a few thousand helmets here and there, and eventually those helmets mean nothing for a country like Ukraine. So I think a great game would be my recommendation.
Yeah, so my recommendation is a book that was a consequence of. I mean, I've recommended this once. I'm recommending this again because two significant events have happened in the last 6 months, and one is, of course, now people forget what happened in Kabul and Afghanistan and what's happening, and and this book I'm recommending is called Ghost Wars by Steve Cole. It actually details in a post-Soviet Afghanistan, the whole American situation and the Bin Laden thing. The reason I'm recommending this book is because it happened after the whole Soviet Afghanistan issues in 1989-90, and the unintended consequence of that, or maybe the intended, I don't know, was the emergence of these Islamist organizations like Al Qaeda and so forth. So the you don't know what a conflict, when it starts, what it's going to come. You had the whole Iraq conflict, and we know what that led to, and so forth. And of course, the Soviet, I mean, I don't want to go into the detail of the Taliban and the Al Qaeda and what happened. Everyone knows the detail of how the emergence happened, and then what's happened since, and of the horrendous events of 9/11 and how bin Laden was shot dead. But read these books to find a perspective of ki kahan kya geopolitical, a change में क्या क्या हुआ है. That term butterfly effect, right? One small event taking place in the world can catapult God knows what. So, having said that, our thoughts and prayers with the people of Ukraine. And if you want to watch a show on Russia, or past Soviet, what it was, I think there is a show on Netflix called The Last Tsar, which talks about the last Tsar and the emergence of Russia under Lenin after. So, kabhi mauka mile to watch that also. It's unrelated to the discussion, but if you want to watch something, the whole Gregory Rasputin and sort of things. But our thoughts and prayers, guys, go to the people of Ukraine, towards the people of Ukraine and what they're facing. I don't know how this is going to end, unfortunately, or I don't know what the end is going to be. But we just hope saner heads prevail, cooler, calmer thoughts prevail, and things that can be sorted out with diplomacy, meetings, conversations, dialogue can be sorted out. War is never a solution, and I hope we don't see the worst being happening. Any last thoughts, Kishore, Harita, before we wrap up?
I don't have a good feeling about it. I think it might turn bloodier, at least for a little while, maybe a week, fortnight, and probably only then might these countries agree for some kind of negotiation across the table. And I think India should also shed its inhibitions and try mediating. I mean, if Imran Khan, with all his pedigree, can offer a mediation, can offer some kind of mediation.
I agree.
I don't think India should be left behind. India should offer its best officers for this kind of a role, and I think high time that India also assumes this kind of a position. So
Absolutely.
let us see if India turns on that puts on that kind of a hat.
Yeah.
We don't know if they wish
We,
to
we,
do it, but
so
yeah.
far, India has not been the backbencher, that the troublemaker, nor has it been the frontbencher who raises their hand with a question. We've been wo beach mein, who might laugh at what the backbencher does and like take notes from what the front person does. Now, there is a separate debate that the people in the front might not be speaking of substance, and India might have stuff of substance to say. But I think India should probably lead the efforts to mediate. We should not take positions
Yeah.
if we don't want to, but I agree we should take the mediation. Harita, any last thoughts before we wrap up?
Yeah, with great power comes great responsibility. So these nations must realize what they are into and what they will be doing to the nations and leading the world towards with their like greed and lust for power. So that's
Fascinating. Excellent thoughts, guys. Maybe we'll do a follow up podcast a few weeks or a month from now or so. Our good friend Mohal will maybe able to join in that one as well. I'm going to. He's probably going to write angry text to all of us saying you forgot this point that we discussed about. But we'll leave that. We'll leave that for that next discussion. Please like, share, subscribe. Please follow them, Mohan and Kishore, on Facebook and Twitter, as well as Harita. But Harita ka to you always see her, talking about mind makers, plugging pieces and stuff. But write to them personally on Twitter, and they might have some very different takes on the subjects than what you're thinking. We want a nuanced debate on this. We'll get more voices. We'll talk. Even for Afghanistan, we did that. We got someone who's working very closely with the Afghans on the ground. uh, it's a developing situation, guys. Just stay posted, keep reading, and keep your eyes and ears open. Till then, it's goodbye from all of us, and we'll be back very shortly.